In this episode,
people are obsessed with automation and they're going to come up with new ways of automating things that don't need to be automated. Our industry is all about automation, so we have a bias for automating things. We like automating things.
we are developers. Yeah.
Yeah, we consider automation mostly as good. And it took me like a very long time to understand that automation itself is not good or bad. It's just faster. If you automate garbage, you just get more garbage more quickly.
Welcome to Pragmatic Talks, a podcast and video series where we discuss startups, contemporary digital product development, modern technologies, and product management. This episode is brought to you by Pragmatic Coders in collaboration with ACE, Agile Software Development and Product Management Conference. We believe that everyone should have equal access to knowledge about product development and entrepreneurship, and also everyone should have the opportunity to apply it in pursuit of making our world a better place. Through this series, we aim to create an impact on the future world. In today's episode, we are joined by Gojko Adzic. Gojko is a highly regarded and award-winning author, consultant, and trainer in the software development community. Known for his influential book, Specification by Example, Gojko has played a pivotal role in shaping modern development practices. His innovative approaches have helped countless teams improve their collaboration and product quality. In this episode, we dive into the practical aspects of Specification by Example and explore its impact on reducing misunderstandings in complex domains. We also discuss the evolving landscape of software development, the role of automation, and the potential future of AI in supporting development processes. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gojko Adzic. Welcome in the next episode of Pragmatic Talks. We are today at ACE conference again, and today with us we have our great guest, Gojko Adzic. Welcome, Gojko.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure to have you here, especially that I know your work. I know you since 2010 probably, or something like this. And I remember when I read for the first time Specification by Example book that you wrote, that was something for me that was very new at the market at the time, and something that clarified a lot of things around how to talk about the requirements, but also how to put the requirements into action and how to turn these requirements, the specification, into tests, automated tests. At that moment in time, that was pretty innovative. Maybe right now, for most people, this is something that that everyone is doing, but actually you were the one of the innovators at the time who started this movement, most probably you are the one who propagated it into the market.
Thanks very much for saying that. I really appreciate it. I mean, those ideas actually, they come from middle 80s or late 80s. And if you read Jerry Weinberg and Donald Gauss's books, Exploring Requirements, for example, the core ideas are there. Ward Cunningham did a lot of that stuff, and I think he was the true innovator, figuring out how to do these things in late 80s, early 90s. But in early 2000s, that was still like magic. Nobody really knew it that much. And as I said, today, it's kind of common knowledge, and I'm glad to have played a small part in it. One of the things that really inspired me to do the book is I was at a conference, very, very much like this in 2007 or 8. There was a presenter on the stage talking about how all of this stuff around agile requirements is bullshit because, it's all theoretical. Nobody's actually kind of doing it that way. And I thought to myself, well, do I live in some unicorn land? What am I, because we just had a really successful project like that. A couple of people I knew from the community doing really well there. So my goal with the book was not just to explain how to do these things, but actually to document that there are real teams out there that got real benefits out of that. And it was all, provoked by this person on the stage saying this thing doesn't happen. I wanted to show how, yes, it does happen. Maybe it doesn't happen in your world because, you're not doing it right, but it doesn't mean that everybody else is kind of stupid. I think a big part of why that book was successful is that it's actually real stories of real people, not just theoretical knowledge. So yeah, I'm really glad that you liked it and that it made a difference.
Okay, so you're an author, you're a consultant, trainer, but tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who is Gojko Adzic?
I'm a developer, at the core of everything. I never really wanted to do anything else apart from write software. When I was a kid, I started writing software by copying and pasting code from German, like instruction manuals for Commodore 64. I had no idea, I still can't read German, but, there were German, and then some lines of code, and then German. I would like copy and paste those lines of code, and Commodore 64 would say, or, the screen would go flashing and things like that. It was magic for me. Since then, I never really wanted to do anything else apart from developing software. And all of this other stuff that came out, spec by example, impact mapping and things like that, they're all like side things I had to learn to build software better. And I still, most of the time, code. And I build my own software products. And that's like, for me, the most magical thing there is. If you look at, those legends from the Middle Ages and movies about medieval times, there's like wizards. I was always fascinated by wizards. And, wizards come and they say something, and their words turn into reality. And, you say abracadabra and, something happens over there. That's what we do with software. We type some words on an editor or do something, and those words turn into real world. People interact with our products, and that's magic. That's kind of, for me, I'm completely fascinated by that. I like magic. I like building things out of, ideas and words, and letting people interact with that and seeing where it goes.
Gojko Adzic, developer magician.
Wizard.
Perfect. Okay, let's back to the specification.
You did not expect this.
I didn't. Let's try to get back to specification by example. Some people who are watching it most probably are not familiar with the specification by example and never heard about it before. So if you could outline a few things about specification by example that are most important in this approach.
Spec by example is a very quick way of getting people from different roles, most usually developers, testers, customers, product people, UX people, to quickly disagree about kind of the key things they need to disagree about, so that then they can reach a shared understanding and an agreement on what needs to be built. And the idea is at the core that it's very difficult for people to say what they want up front, but they can complain very easily. And if we give people something concrete enough to complain, then they will get out the disagreements out quickly rather than going and implementing the software and sit down and then complain. And as an example of an example, I worked with this company where they were trying to allow people to download digital clips if they have enough money in the account. There was a bunch of things they wanted to solve with that. And so you'd have this function where you put some money into the account, if you have enough money, you're allowed to download, and then you get the money deducted. And there were two examples there that somebody came up with. You have 10 euros in the account. What you're trying to download costs 5. You're allowed to download. Your account is left with €5. Or you start with €5. The thing you're trying to download costs 10. You're not allowed to download. You're still left with 5. And then what's really magical about that is you can get these boundaries and edge cases, because the misunderstanding usually comes at boundaries. Everybody's going to agree on a happy day scenario. So we gave two testers 5 minutes, and they came up with an example of you have $9.99 in your account. What you're trying to download costs 10. And everybody said, like, you're not allowed to download, and you're left with $9.99, apart from the sales director who said you're allowed to download.
Okay.
And we looked at him and said, why? We said, it's in the spec. He said, where is it in the spec? I mean, first of all, we don't have a spec. You just gave us one line. It says allow downloads if, enough money in the account. And he said, well, there, if you have enough money in the account, look, enough money. And then we realized that, his definition of enough money is completely different from our definition of enough money. And all these assumptions came out about profit models, about profitability and why not, and rejection rates on cards. And there was this whole thing that exploded then for half an hour of very good discussions. And then when it kind of consolidated, we understood a lot more about the problem he was trying to solve. And his solution was so insanely complicated for that it would like take 7-man millennia to do the job. But one of my colleagues said, look, in the first iteration, how about we allow people to go like €0.50 into credit? And then we do all this complicated stuff later. And he said, well, okay. And then we did that, and for years later, they didn't touch it. And this decision made this company a lot of money because of the whole kind of thing. So those kind of things usually come out after you develop software, because developed software is the first time people can interact with this, the first time people can really complain, and then all these, additional problems come out. But if we can put concrete examples in front of people to get all these arguments out, then we can reduce rework significantly. We can improve the quality of the software, and kind of most of the use cases in the Spec by Example book, people have reduced their cycle time by an order of magnitude because of this whole removing rework that doesn't need to be done. They were able to align testers and developers and product work into much tighter cycles, and actually get this whole kind of quality. As in it does what it needs to do. It's not broken. There's no surprises there. Under much better control. There was a fantastic use case of a team from a big French bank that I interviewed for the book, where they were working on a mission critical project for a bank, and for 5 years they had no priority 1 bugs, which is like unheard of. and these people were releasing every 2 weeks. It's not like, they've done one version and then for 5 years they didn't do another version. That happens in some banks. But at the time when I wrote the book, it was almost impossible to get people to understand that, yes, these things, exist. But as you said today, luckily lots of teams do have this as kind of common knowledge.
Yeah, I remember that, at that time, it's 2010-ish, 12, 13, 14, it was pretty uncommon for people to actually, bring all the knowledge into one room. Usually, there was a time that testers were sitting in a different room, developers were sitting in, programmers sitting in another room, some business analysts in the other room, not even talking about the stakeholders or domain experts who were usually in the totally different building or city and whatever. So bringing all of these people together and providing them a framework that they can use to talk to each other and to visualize how they are thinking about the product and the requirements. That was something that was really new for many of them. But at the end of the day, right now, as you said, like most of the companies, or maybe not most, but many companies works like that.
And so I wasn't involved in the software industry in the 50s and 60s. I wasn't born then, but my understanding was that up until kind of probably early 80s, stuff was done by people in the same room. And then the industry went through this kind of crazy phase where everything was, specialized, and you had, up until then, the same people were testing and building the software. That was, you were, that was your job. But then you had testers, you had developers, and everybody had their own roles, and project management got involved and things like that, and it took like 20 years for people to realize that that's a bad idea. So now we're going back and making it simpler and easier, but then still you have all these kind of scaled agile frameworks now that kind of just making things more complicated again.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly, that's true. So, in terms of the specification by example, what also was really interesting in that was that like the goal was to put this requirements, the specification into action and turn it into the automated test. So could you tell us a little bit more about it?
I don't think that was the goal. That's a nice side effect of things.
Okay.
And lots of people think about automation as the goal, and because our industry is all about automation, so we have a bias for automating things. We like automating things. That's what we do.
We are developers, yeah.
Yeah, and we consider automation mostly as good. And it took me like a very long time to understand that automation itself is not good or bad. It's just faster. if you automate garbage, you just get more garbage more quickly. If you automate a good process, you do get something well. So the idea with automation, spec by example, is that once you have some kind of common understanding, documented through examples or something like that, there needs to be a reality check that the reality did not move. Products evolve, and you have 6 months ago, you had this idea that this is the definition of enough money, but then things evolve, and especially in complex organizations, things evolve. So 6 months from now, the definition of enough money might change. It might change in the code, but then you no longer have a spec that reflects reality. You no longer have and the idea was basically to automate the validation of that so we can keep a check on reality, and we can make sure that the documents are kind of in sync with the code. And because that needs to be checked over and over and over and over and over and over again, automation is kind of a natural solution for that. Now, if we do automation in a way that humans can still understand, then if I change something over here and something over there changed, then we can show a document that explains this to a human and say, look, this no longer works like that. Mm-hmm. Now, is it a bug? Is it something we forgot to talk about? Do you actually want this? It just we didn't talk about it. Is it like, we really did not understand that this is going to be impacted there? And having automated tests that are human readable through, again, examples and things like that, allows us to have that conversation. And again, that saves a ton of time. And it allows us to then use these documents as a way of starting a discussion next time. So if I'm going to change some kind of payment processing a year after I've done it, I don't need to do the analysis over and over again. I can just say, look, this is what we agreed last time. Because this test is green, I can still trust it. I don't know how many times I've joined the project where people have told me, like, this is the spec. And then they say, but don't trust it completely. It was written like 2 years ago. So, and this is where I think, again, a lot of the waste that we have in software processes comes from knowledge that was lost or knowledge that we don't know we have. There's a famous quote by Lou Platt, who was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard for a long time, and he said that if Hewlett-Packard only knew what Hewlett-Packard already knows, we would be 3 times more profitable. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem with kind of this knowledge that's stuck in people's heads. If we externalize that knowledge and make sure that it's kind of valid, then we can speed things up. So automation really is there just as a way of making sure that these things are still valid. I think where, again, because things move so quickly, especially, if you're developing and releasing software every couple of weeks, if multiple teams are working on the same software, having this set of automated tests that we can use as a source of truth becomes incredibly powerful, because in lots of cases, code is the only thing you can really trust. And developers can read code, but then they become a bottleneck for information. If a tester needs some information, if a product person needs some information, they have to go to a developer. If we have this knowledge externalized in the form of automated tests, but human-readable automated tests, then it's accessible to everybody. And then it does become this institutional memory that survives changes in teams, changes in ways of working, changes in technology, and it becomes really, really powerful, especially because technology changes all the time. And if you need to, migrate from one database to another, your business rules have not changed. And having the business rules there documented well speeds up the whole thing.
That's true. I'm still meeting bunch of people who are working in the projects where they are not automating tests at all. Like, they do not have automated tests, and usually they also do not have any specification at all, or not even, the specification that's up to date, but just no specification. They are just happy coding for years. And what I see is that usually they are slowing down with the process. With every new line of code, it gets slower and slower and slower to add new things, to change things, to modify. So having both specification and the automation in one place and doing it once actually is, like cutting the cost by the 50% of their time. Yeah?
And as you said, enabling you to keep working at a sustainable pace, where I think yes, you can get something live quickly and not care about sustainability, of course. But if this is something that needs to stay with you for the next couple of years, or something where the core of your business is going to be built on, then it needs to be sustainable. It's not just about getting it out now. It's about kind of preparing for the future as well. And although, you can't really predict what's going to happen in the future, you can kind of prepare for change. And not doing that is irresponsible.
So how does specification by example differ from, for example, acceptance test-driven development or behavior-driven development?
That's a philosophical question. It's a terminological question. And I think in early 2000s, there were lots of kind of development concurrently happening on this, because early 2000s were a time where the XP community figured out how to do development in a good way, but we were still trying to figure out how to integrate testers into the thing, and business analysts and things like that. So lots of people were trying to kind of, the overlapping solutions for the same problem. And again, these ideas have been around at least from mid-80s. And people have been doing these things. Craig Larman approached this thing more from a perspective of using acceptance tests to get people to kind of clarify things, and that's where kind of acceptance test driven development is as a phrase. Dan North and Liz Keogh were working with ThoughtWorks at the time, and Chris Matz, and they were trying to get business people more integrated into this, and business people don't care about testing. So they were trying to kind of look at system behaviors and explain this thing more from a kind of a behavioral perspective. And there were a bunch of other names kind of thrown at that time. Some work I was doing around that time, we couldn't get people to engage writing examples or writing tests because they didn't care about that. But the name specification sounded dangerous enough so that business people wanted to be involved. And that's why I started calling this thing more kind of specification oriented stuff. And for me, it's all the same thing, really. But behavior-driven development, again, it evolved into something around given when thens. And that's like a very interesting kind of thing, how it evolved. Dan North, who came up with the name, had this presentation in, I think, 2010, where he talked about how behavior-driven development is a whole methodology for developing software. Because for a while, BDD was whatever Dan North was interested in. And he talks about, pull-based, flow-oriented and things like that. So if you look at it from that perspective, if BDD is a methodology, then spec by example is the kind of requirements part of it. If BDD is kind of, just this conversation piece and collaboration piece that, again, Liz Keogh talks about, then spec by example and BDD are the same thing. Again, we're getting into, the different terminologies, and I think for different organizations, different terminology works better. For some people, specifications are more dangerous than tests. For some, tests are more dangerous than specifications. Dave Farley talks a lot about continuous compliance. Because he used to work with organizations where they need to prove regulatory compliance around the requirements process, and doing this allows you to continuously prove your compliance. So I think the message there really is figure out a name that sounds dangerous enough for your organization and use that.
Dangerous enough so business people will be interested.
Business people would be involved, and yes, everybody who needs to be involved is involved.
So it's 2024. Does anything change? So, the specification, by example, that the framework that you described had to change recently, or is it still up to date and it still is used widely and that people are using it?
A couple of things that changed in the last few years. First of all, for whatever reason, the community kind of seems to have consolidated on given when then as a way of describing these things. And there's some good stuff about it, there's some bad stuff about it, but we were starting out, 20 years ago, there was a lot more variety in how you were describing examples. Some people were describing examples with tables, some people were describing examples with flow charts, some people were describing examples with words and bullet points, and there was a lot of kind of innovation in that space. But today, most people seem to kind of go through this kind of given when then format, and there's a whole ecosystem of tools that evolved in that format that's kind of interesting. And the other thing that happened, I think, is we're getting more and more of these kind of decentralized systems. 20 years ago, systems were a lot more monolithic. Now there's kind of more smaller pieces that are kind of talking to each other, and then these things are more kind of broken into smaller bits and pieces. Something that is coming, it's not yet there, is kind of how all these LLMs will be kind of integrated into that. I think I get like one email a week from somebody who started a startup and thinks that they're going to change the world by getting ChatGPT to write given when thens. It's very difficult to engage with that, because for me the big value of Spec by Example is getting humans to complain quickly. Optimizing how you write 700 given when then files is not really the bottleneck we need to solve. But there is something there. People are trying to do that. There is something there. And I don't know what's going to happen with that. For me, saying, oh, we had this like hallucinogen AI robot write our specifications is insane, because who knows whether they're right or wrong. And if you have somebody generating a ton of bullshit, then you're creating another bottleneck of somebody else having to review it and understand what's going on. But I think there might be some kind of collaboration thing going on there where things get suggested or proposed, or some things that might not necessarily be considered get evaluated. One of the things that really helps Spec by Example is having testers in the room to propose these edge cases like 999. The developers are not necessarily good at proposing these things, because developers are thinking it from a builder mentality, like what does it need to do in the core scenario and things like that.
Positive
thinking, and business people really care about the end results. But having all these examples is really powerful, and having somebody suggest that is really useful. And when I was still working as a consultant, I met with lots of teams where they did not actually have anybody who's good at that. And maybe that's where, AI and LLMs can act this kind of adversarial role and generate lots of these kind of interesting things to consider. That might be an interesting thing where things will evolve. I don't know. People are obsessed with automation, and they're going to come up with new ways of automating things that don't need to be automated. And
they don't need to be done at all.
They don't need to be done at all, but we'll see. I think it's a wonderful time to be alive.
Yeah, that's true. Regarding what you just said, I think that in one of the previous episodes with Joe Justice, we were discussing mob AI a little, and mob AI is something that you actually described, that the AI became part of the team, which is supporting the team members in this kind of thing, like discovering the things that they wouldn't discover.
Quite, and from that perspective, I think there is some interesting potential there to do that. I remember when GPT-2 was out, I was kind of fascinated with that, and I was showing this to a friend of mine who's a business analyst. We looked at this thing kind of doing a bit of writing business analysis documents. And in England, there's the gambling sector. I spent a bit of time working there, and this kind of friend of mine works there. There is like horse racing rules, and rule number 4 is really, really complicated. It gets people to recalculate history, and that's kind of a good test for a business analyst, effectively, to get them to explain this complicated rule in a simple way. And it's often used in interviews to do that. And I got, GPT-2 and said, look, explain Tattersall Rule 4 with examples. Did a perfect job, absolutely perfect job. And this friend of mine was like, I'm going to lose my job now. And And they said, no, but wait a minute. I said, explain rule number 5. Rule number 5 does not exist. But ChatGPT brilliantly explained rule number 5 in, interesting examples. It's complete random garbage. And I think that's the problem with these things. If you use them as an inspiration, if you use them as something that helps you speed up your process, then I think that could be quite powerful.
Of course, if you revisit what they are creating and see and check if it's true or not, because as you said, AI is still hallucinating, maybe less than GPT-2, but still you need to be aware of that. Okay, so 2 questions combined together. One question is, for whom is the specification, by example, or maybe later, to which projects or which part of the requirement specification, by example, works well, and if there are any areas where the specification, by example, is something that is too much or maybe too little. And the second question combined with that, that came also from my experience when I was trying to introduce, or actually I was introducing specification, by example, to various teams. I've seen that some teams were struggling with using it, and some were struggling with using it because they see that they cannot figure out the proper examples, and in other teams where like, why we are using so heavy framework for such obvious stuff that we just need to ship it. It just need to be done. Yeah. So what do you think, or maybe?
So I think spec by example is useful where there's a big potential for misunderstanding across different roles, because that's kind of the problem it solves. It solves the problem of finding 6 months later that we missed something important, or finding 3 weeks later that we missed something important. Usually that is when the domain is complicated, or so there's a potential for developers and testers not to really understand the business domain, or where organization is complex enough that there's opportunity for information to be lost and not communicated well. So if you have a very small team and they're all incredibly technical, it's still probably a good way to kind of clarify things very quickly with examples, but you don't need the rest. You don't need, writing it down in a human-readable form because everybody can read code. You don't need this collaboration between testers and developers because everybody's kind of, already collaborating well. In a trivial case, if you have a single-person team and that team has communication problems, spec by example is not going to help. But the bigger the team grows, the more likely you will have people at different levels of domain knowledge, people with different levels of knowledge about the system and how things work, how they should work. That's where kind of spec by example fits in really nicely. If you just need to change, this thing from blue to yellow, there's not much point doing 20 examples of what kind of yellow. As you said, there's no opportunity for misunderstanding there that much. And another kind of aspect where spec by example kind of has a requirement is examples are kind of deterministic. So there needs to be like, in these conditions, this thing happens. And in these conditions, we allow the download. In these conditions, we don't allow the download. In these conditions, you're left with €7.35 in the account. In this condition, you're left with €8 in the account. For things that are not deterministic like that, examples are not a good way to describe things. One kind of illustrative case of that are video games. The key thing for video games is to be fun. It's not to be correct, it's to be fun. And fun is very difficult to describe with deterministic examples. So spec by example is not useful for that. But what they do in video games is they like build a prototype of a level and they play test it and they do user research and things like that. Those are much better things. If nobody has the knowledge of what needs to be done, then it's too early to do spec by example. Then you can do market research, you can do a customer journey research, there's lots of other stuff you can do, but if there's no domain experts, then nobody can tell you if this is 5 or 6. Then examples are kind of pointless because you just have a bunch of questions out. Again, there's different techniques involved. So I think the preconditions for when spec by example applies are where the domain is complex enough to have a potential for misunderstanding. The organization is complex enough that you have kind of an opportunity for information to be lost or misinterpreted, and that there is somebody actually to say this is right or this is wrong. And there are perfectly valid cases where, outside of that, and Spec, by example, is not good for that. So, doing the two-person team that works on a trivial domain, don't do this. It's pointless. Doing something that's highly technical, like building a new TCP protocol implementation, you probably will have some examples of how this thing needs to work, but getting 20 people in a room to discuss edge case for that, probably not that useful. But figuring out how to do trade reconciliation in a banking system, probably yes, because there's lots of opportunities for misunderstanding there.
And not so many people know how to do it. Like they are maybe just a few domain experts in the bank who actually know how to do this.
Yeah,
and maybe sometimes they agree to each other. Yeah, so.
And again, one of the things you mentioned is, does this thing need to be long-term sustainable? Are we building something that just needs to be there for the next week? If yes, go and do it. Don't just do it. If it's wrong, do it again. And if you're building something that needs to be there 5 years from now, you probably want to have some institutional knowledge that will survive all the team members that built it leaving the company, or half of them, or somebody going on maternity leave, or somebody getting sick, or
just move to another project.
Moving to another project, and then we do need this kind of knowledge in some other shape or form, not just in the code.
Okay, so if someone would like to learn more about the specification, by example, what they should look for, where they should look for more information?
Well, I mean, the Spec by Example book is a good starting point. There's lots and lots of resources online. As you said, it's more or less not a new thing anymore. I wrote another book with Dave Evans and Tom Roden called 50 Quick Ideas to Improve Your User Stories. That's quite good. Yeah, I guess just kind of Google for Spec by Example. That's there's lots of resources there.
But you're also leading trainings and providing a course.
Yes, I still do. I still do workshops, and we are kind of in Poland. We are partnered with Procognita.
Yeah.
So if somebody from Poland is watching this and you want to learn more about it, go to the Procognita website and look at like the Spec by Example courses. Thanks for letting me plug that.
Yeah, our friends from Pragmatic are always welcome to promote to be promoted here as well. Okay, so thank you, Gojko, very much for the discussion about
Thank you very much.
The example. So I hope to talk with you soon.
Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Thank you.
Pragmatic Talks is delivered to you by Pragmatic Coders, the first choice software development partners for startup founders. Be sure to catch all new episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast channels. And if you are thinking about building your own startup or struggling with product development, contact us and find out what we can do together.